r/AskReddit. Historians, what is the best middle finger moment in history? To Joseph Stalin. Stop sending people to kill me. We've already captured 5 of them, one of them with a bomb and another with a rifle. If you don't stop sending killers, I'll send a very fast working one to Moscow and I certainly won't have to send another. The Battle of Alesia. Julius Caesar's attacking some Gauls in modern day France, and they go hide in a castle on top of a hill. Caesar's army isn't big enough to take them all at once, and the Gauls have reinforcement coming, so a siege is impossible. So Caesar just builds a bigger castle around the one he's attacking. He literally just built 2 walls back to back in a ring around the castle. The first Gaul army was already too small to defeat Caesar, and his fortifications only gave him a greater advantage. The reinforcement were also unable to defeat Caesar's army, now that he was behind several layers of spike pits and both earthen and wooden walls. Plus the Gauls inside had no way to communicate with the reinforcement outside, so they couldn't coordinate attacks. Both Gallic armies were defeated as they attacked Caesar's newly built fortifications, and Caesar emerged victorious. It's probably my favorite battle of all time. The Romans had to build over 20 miles of walls, right? And they did it really fast. Crazy fast. I still don't get how you can build such an enormous structure in such a short span of time. I guess he did have a literal army building it, which helps. The construction and use of the war wolf, supposedly the largest trebuchet ever built. When it was disassembled it would fill up 30 wagons. So anyways, King Edward I built this to siege a Scottish castle. But before it was even built the Scottish people tried to surrender. To which Edward responded with a prompt no. In actuality he responded with, "You do not deserve any grace, but must surrender to my will." In other words, I built this trebuchet over 40 days and I'm most definitely going to use it, and proceeded to use the trebuchet anyways. I went to all the trouble to build this dank trebuchet and now you bet your ass I'm test it. You could have surrendered when I asked, you could have surrendered a week in. But after 40 days there's no take-backs. 30 wagons to transport it, and 40 days to assemble it, and they expected him to just pack it up when they surrendered? Ah, hell no. Big Ed gonna chuck some rocks. The Second Defenestration of Prague. The Holy Roman Emperor and King of Bohemia sends representatives to the Protestant city of Prague telling them to convert to Catholicism. The representatives get thrown out a window and allegedly landed in a pile of manure. Second? What was the first? It's not as good of a story, but a procession of churchgoers got a stone thrown at them from a window in town hall, so the crowd went into town hall and defenestrated the judge and several council members. They died from the fall. Who didn't die from the fall was killed by some people waiting under the windows. So when France exiles Napoleon Bonaparte, the first time, they didn't think to change out military personnel. So he basically rolls up to the first French outpost he gets to, says, "What's up?" and begins reassembling an army. By the time he gets to Paris, he's got enough forces that France is like, well, welcome back. He supposedly said to the first soldiers he encountered, "Any of you who dare oppose the emperor, fire." The soldiers cheered and joined him. This reminds me of the execution of Michael Knee. "Soldiers, when I give the command to fire, fire straight at my heart. Wait for the order. It will be my last to you. I protest against my condemnation. I have fought 100 battles for France, and not one against her. Soldiers, fire." The soldiers fired and killed him. Ferruccio Lamborghini was a rich man owning his company that built tractors. He talked to Ferrari about the imperfections of his car and how to improve them, and they basically laughed at a young tractor mechanic trying to tell them about sport cars, so he decided to start making luxury sport cars to compete with Ferrari, and thus, the rivalry was born. So I'd say the middle finger of this guy to Ferrari was pretty noticeable. When Ford was about to buy Ferrari and noticed something in the paperwork that said Ford would not own a Ferrari race team. They were upset about this, and Enzo basically said Ford was too low to own such a great team. Later on, Ford recruits Shelby Carroll and beats Ferrari at Le Mans, and has every single time since they've entered a car. Olga of Kiev. When her husband died, the country that killed him assumed they'd just take over and force her into marriage. She straight up killed the dignitaries that were sent to tell her she had to marry multiple times in the most intense way possible. She then traveled to where her husband had been killed and basically burned the place to the ground again in the most hardcore, amazing way. They made her a freaking saint. She also requested something like 2 pigeons and a sparrow from each house as an apology/capitulation gift. Once given the birds, she tied burning sulfur to their feet and released them to roost. They'd catch on fire, and that's how she burned a whole village. A pirate known as Jane Leffett had a bounty of $500 put on him by a governor. So he put a $5,000 bounty on the governor. That's not even Jane Laffitt's best docu moment in my opinion. He was propositioned by the British, basically, hey, show us how to navigate the swamps around New Orleans so we can launch a sneak attack. And the king will pardon you and make you a privateer. And he was like, give me a fortnight to consider it. So he snuck over to the governor's mansion, scaled the outside wall, and was waiting for him on his office. Told the governor and Andrew Jackson the British plan and offer how he wouldn't betray New Orleans. So all he asked was for a pardon, and he'd give them everything they needed to win the war. And he did. In the 1970s, a small town of Vulcan, West Virginia asked for state funding to replace a bridge into town. The state legislature refused to grant Vulcan the funding they needed. Instead, the town appealed to the Soviet Union for aid. After hearing about the request, the state legislature immediately granted over $1 million for the town to build a new bridge. If a small town in West Virginia asking for Soviet funding in the middle of the Cold War isn't a big middle finger to the state government, then I don't know what is. The funny part is that 2 Soviet representatives at the US Embassy actually came over to look at the broken bridge and seriously considered funding the rebuilding to piss off the Americans. Imagine the propaganda the Soviets could have pushed from that. Honestly, smart move by the town. Win for them, no matter who funds it. This requires some background. The Spartans were famously blunt. They were trained to get to the point when speaking, instead of using artsy and beautiful language that would have been common at the time, by being bitten on the thumb if they became long-winded. Now to the meat. Philip II of Macedon, Alexander the Great's father, sent the Spartans a letter saying, "Would you like me to enter your land as friend or foe?" The Spartans responded with one word. Neither. Philip was irate. He then sent another long-winded message. "If once I enter into your territories, I will destroy you all, never to rise again." The Spartans then sent back one word. "If." It was like putting your head in a lion's mouth, and I love it. Operation Paul Bunyan. It's 1976. Some Americans at the Korean DMZ are cutting down a tree that obscures their vision to the North Korean side. A couple of North Koreans come out and kill a few Americans with their own axe. The Americans and South Koreans come back with such a massive show of force it's not even funny. Bombers, jet planes, 27 helicopters, a full aircraft carrier moved off the coast. Thousands of troops, troop carriers, commandos, all just to send in a squad of army engineers with chainsaws to cut down that goddamn tree. On the crowning of King Henry VII, he backdated his own reign to before the date of the Battle of Bosworth, meaning anyone who was loyal to him now, but had shown any sign of opposition at Bosworth, was now a traitor and an enemy to the realm. Justice served. French surrender in World War II. Hitler dictates that the French capitulation take place at Compiègne, a forest north of Paris. This is the same spot where 22 years earlier the Germans had signed the armistice ending World War I. Hitler intends to disgrace the French and avenge the German defeat. To further deepen the humiliation, He orders that the signing ceremony take place in the same railroad car that hosted the earlier surrender. The armistice is signed on June 22nd. Under its terms, 2/3 of France is to be occupied by the Germans. The French army is to be disbanded. In addition, France must bear the cost of the German invasion. Hitler later destroyed the railroad carriage when things started going south for the Axis. Khosrow and Ashurban in the 500s AD. He took over a town, Antioch, that used to belong to the Byzantine Empire, ran by Emperor Justinian, but before he burned it to the ground, he had architects and a bunch of other people go through and record exactly what the city and its buildings looked like. He then built a new town that looked exactly the same and named it Antioch Khosrow, which translates roughly to Khosrow's better version of Antioch. I would say the moment that Rollo swore allegiance to the French king, the bishops present suggested that Rollo kiss the king's foot as a sign of submission. It was probably an idea intended to humiliate Rollo and was not taken very well. After some discussion, it was agreed that one of Rollo's men would do it. However, the person chosen lifted the king's foot and, without bending down, brought it up to his mouth. Not surprisingly, the king fell over amid general laughter in the court. Following this amusing scene, the king and his men swore to honor the concession to Rollo. When Otto von Bismarck was about 50, he was walking down a street when a man ran up to him and shot him 5 times. Otto then turned around and began to beat the absolute shit out of him until some armed guards come to help him. When they inspected Otto for wounds, they found that all 5 hit, but they all either just grazed him or bounced off his ribs. Literally the Iron Chancellor. German quality. Henry VIII divorcing Catherine of Aragon. Henry VIII, I want a divorce. Church, we don't do that here. Henry VIII, I'll start my own church with blackjack and hookers. Andrew Jackson was walking around Washington, D.C. when an assassin tried to kill him with 2 pistols. Both pistols misfired, and Jackson proceeded to beat the would-be killer within an inch of his life with his cane. Well, I mean, who brings 2 pistols to a cane fight anyway?